What bearing does a person's sexuality or gender identity have on the work that they do? Have you ever heard of the Gay Purge? Canada's military was established after Confederation. Canada's military force has long been associated with masculinity. The Canadian Armed Forces have been involved in fighting multiple wars, including the South African War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Cold War, the Korean War, the First Gulf War, as peacekeepers in Rwanda, and in the war in Afghanistan. Historically, the Canadian Armed Forces culture presented heterosexuality as the norm, and being LGBTQ+ was seen as a threat to their community and the overall organizational culture. However, LGBTQ+ people have been a part of the military since its inception. As a result of a heteronormative worldview and the culture of the Canadian Army, many LGBTQ+ Canadians lost their careers in the armed forces during the 20th century. Once discovered as members of the LGBTQ+ community, under policies that took root in the 1950s and continued into the early 1990s, federal agencies investigated, sanctioned, and sometimes fired members of the Canadian Armed Forces, the RCMP, and the public services as they were deemed unsuitable because of their sexuality and/or gender identity. Many who kept their jobs were demoted, were overlooked for promotions, and/or had their security clearances rescinded. This period of history where queer, trans, and non-binary people who served in the military were fired or fined for their sexuality or gender is known today as the Gay Purge. The Gay Purge campaign was driven by the notion that the perceived character weakness of LGBTQ+ employees would make them susceptible to blackmail in the tense climate of the Cold War. In 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gave a speech in the House of Commons in Ottawa to apologize to the victims of the Gay Purge. The Canadian government promised to pay up to 110 million Canadian dollars to compensate the victims of the decades of government-authorized discrimination against LGBTQ+ Canadians. It is important to remember that damages to the LGBTQ+ Canadians went beyond financial loss, and that many suffered from psychological damage as well due to the trauma caused. In 2018, director Sarah Fody created a documentary called The Fruit Machine, where she interviewed a series of LGBTQ+ elders who had experienced workplace discrimination and trauma based on their sexuality in the Canadian Civil Service. How has the Canadian Army been presented in your education? Have you learned about the Gay Purge in your social studies education so far? What other stories are missing from social studies classrooms and curricula?